From day one, I was in shock with Nikola Jokic. Honestly, he's the biggest talent I've seen in my life.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and as always, you can find me on Twitter at redrock_bball, on Instagram at redrock_bball, and facebook.com/redrockbasketball. We are here today to do another of the season in review podcast as we're just 2 hours away from the start of the NBA Finals. So if you are watching this live, enjoy this, and then you can just transition yourself into Warriors, Cavs, and the Last Crusade, which will be coming up soon. We're going to be talking about the Denver Nuggets. So
let's get to it.
The Denver Nuggets. What an interesting team this team is. You know that there is quite a few of my boyfriends that reside in the Mile High City, and there's going to be lots to talk about for this team, for this past season, for this coming season, for lots of stuff happening in the future as well, because they are one of the more exciting teams with lots of interesting decisions that they have to make free agency wise and cap space wise and all that sort of stuff. We know that they just missed the playoffs behind the Blazers in that 8th seed by one game, finished at 40-42, underperforming their expected win-loss total by 2 wins. I guess some of that is due to that poor start to the season, which can be blamed a lot on poor coaching. They got hot at portions during the season and had one of the best offenses in the entire NBA, which we'll get to in a second. Their draft picks, they have pick 13 in the draft. They also have pick 49 and pick 51. They did have a second first-round choice, but they sent that to Portland in that Yusuf Nurkic deal, which was the Memphis first-round pick, and that's now gone through to Portland as well. Their biggest off-season thing, pick 13 is interesting. They're not going to most likely get an impact player for next season. I'd say they'll be looking probably in the front court for someone there, an OG Anunoby, maybe a guy like that. He would be a good complement to Nikola Jokic to play in that front court there. But their biggest off-season decisions are going to be free agency, because the Rooster, Danilo Gallinari, has opted out of his player option. That was always going to happen. It's not an indication of whether he is going to stay or whether he's going to go. He was due $16 million for next season, so it only makes sense for him to opt out and then lock into a bigger 3-4 year deal, much like Paul Millsap did with Atlanta. It's got nothing to do with his desire to stay in Denver or come back to that team. So he is obviously the biggest decision that this team has to make. We know he's had his injury concerns. We know he has his defensive concerns, but he is a really huge part of what they do offensively. His ability to get to the line, to shoot, to create offense is really key on this team. So whether they commit to that extra money for the Rooster, I think that he does want to stay. I'm pretty sure he wants to stay, but it's all going to be what Denver wants to do. Do they want to spend that money on him and lock that into 4 years at $20 million a year, which is a distinct possibility for the Rooster to get in upcoming free agency? The other guys they've got as unrestricted guys is Roy Hibbert. Cool. Who cares? He came across in that trade, the second trade for the at the deadline. He contributed pretty much nothing, and I think that'll be the case for him moving forward. And Mike Miller has a $3.5 million non-guaranteed deal for next season, and Miller is basically there as a steady hand, as a pseudo coach on the bench, doesn't really do much playing time and helps whip these younger guys into shape. And I'm totally fine with that. Sometimes I decry the importance of veteran leadership, especially when that veteran leadership takes the form of Tayshaun Prince or Andre Miller, getting consistent and significant minutes over developing players, as was the case, say, with Sam Mitchell in Minnesota a couple of years ago. That's where I really hate it. But having Miller on the roster as the 15th man who doesn't play, much like Udonis Haslem in Miami, that sits there, can provide advice, can motivate these guys in practice, I've got no issue with it. It's more that when these guys who are there for their veteran leadership come in and start playing 25 minutes a game, and restricting the development of these other players, then I think it's a really dumb and stupid idea. But this sort of spot of just having him as that guy sitting around, Totally fine with it. The other decision they have to make is Mason Plumlee, who's a restricted free agent. He came across in that Yusuf Nurkic deal from Portland, and they're going to have to pony up some money to keep him. I would expect that they do keep him. Obviously, they gave away Nurkic and a first rounder to acquire him. They like what he can provide as that backup to Jokic, as that guy that can help facilitate the offense from the 5 position, much like Jokic does, obviously to a much lesser degree. But he can keep a similar game style going with his ability to pass and move the ball. And I reckon almost certainly he's going to be looking at $10 million plus per season. And I think that he will be brought back by the Denver Nuggets for next season. If you look at their overall numbers for the year, as I said, they had one of the best offenses in the NBA, 4th in offensive rating. But that was paired with the 29th best defense. And that's the problem. And that's where they do need to improve. They will improve. Natural improvement comes with some of these younger players, but they do need to get someone either at the 4 or at the 3 to help provide some of that defense to help on the perimeter. Jokic is never going to be a good defender. He's never going to be a great defender. He might be able to be an average defender, and that's probably going to be a best case scenario for this team. They played 7th in pace, which was obviously key to the way their offense ran, and 5th in effective field goal percentage. So not only were they running it fast, but they were hitting their shots at a big rate as well. 2nd in the NBA in offensive rebounding percentage, but 30th in creating turnovers, and that's part of that poor defensive action that they had. And they should be a bit better than that because guys like Emmanuel Mudiay and Gary Harris can get their hands on quite a few balls.
Giggity!
And play those passing lanes, but they do need a little bit more from the front court defensively. And as part of that, 28th in the NBA in total steals and 27th in blocks, and that really does impact their defense's ability to be useful contributors, I guess. The best offensive rating on the team, the Rooster, and then Jokic, Ken Farid, and Gary Harris as those top 4 guys. So really important players there. While the best defensive rating in his limited time was Roy Hibbert, Mason Plumlee. And then Jokic and Farid, I think people would be a little bit surprised to see Jokic in there in that, and Farid for that matter, in that best defensive rating. As I said, Jokic he's not a horrendous defender, but he's never going to be a good one. But he's those centers, 4 of those guys, all 4 of those players played center this season, and they led the team in defensive rating. 6 guys on this team hit over 40% on their corner threes. A lot of them to be expected. Gaz Harris, Juancho Hernan-Gomez, Darrell Arthur, who was just lights out from 3 for the entire season. The Rooster, Malik Beasley, and the Blue Arrow, Jamal Murray. Jokic only hit 10% on his corner threes. That's a real anomaly. Because you look at Jokic's numbers and he was just super efficient, and 10% on corner threes is so low that he has got a massive chance to be able to improve that. And when he does, then even more things can start to go right with his offense. Because if we look at some of his other numbers, between 3 and 10 feet, Jokic hit 62% of his shots. 62. Between 10 and 16 feet, so we're talking real mid-range, 53%. These are ludicrous numbers. From 16 feet out to the 3-point line, 55%. His ability to shoot from anywhere was out of control. Now, he hit threes. He didn't hit them at a high rate, but that sort of shooting from Jokic is crazy, and that's why he was such a valuable player for not only the Nuggets, but for fantasy owners right across the world. Gallo and Chandler both finished at 60% at the rim. 68% at the rim. So good numbers there, but Manny Mudiay just the 51%, while the Blue Arrow got to 61%, and that's part of the issue with Mudiay is just this total lack of efficiency, and not being able to finish at the rim is a really big problem for a guy that's as big and as long and as strong as him. He needs to be able to hit those shots at the rim at a higher than 51% rate. The advanced stats leaders on this team, it's going to be a lot of Jokic. He led the team in PR at 26.4, while Hibbert led the team in true shooting at 66.7. Jokic had the highest usage, 23.5, the highest win shares per 48, and a massive offensive box score plus minus at 11.8, while Hibbert led the defense in 5.1, and Jokic had a total box score plus minus of 8.3 and led the team in VORP. I don't think anyone should be surprised with that. Jokic's numbers, I just wanted to get a little bit into his advanced numbers across the league. He was 8th in the NBA in PR, 14th in defensive rebounding percentage, 11th in offensive rebounding percentage, 8th in total rebounding percentage, 7th in offensive rating, 19th in total win shares, and he was the only player, along with Anthony Davis, in the top 20 of win shares that didn't make the playoffs, 5th in the NBA in box score plus minus, and 10th in VORP. That's why I had him as my third team All-NBA center, just for his... Well, did I? Maybe I had Towns there. I can't even remember. But he was in that discussion. I mean, I thought he should have been in discussion even for an All-Star berth for the sort of performances that he put up in just his second season. The Nuggets only used 2 lineups of over 100 minutes for the season. That's something that I'm never going to be able to fully get behind, that lack of continuity. Their best lineup and their most used lineup was the one I think you'd all expect: Chandler, Gallinari, Harris, and Jokic, and that included Moutier at point guard. He did start most of the season there. That was a plus 3.3. Both lineups over 100 minutes were positive, and the other lineup was that exact same lineup, but it had Jameer Nelson in there for Manny Moutier as the point guard. Their most used 4-man, no one has any doubts what that is: Jokic, Harris, Chandler, and Gallo as a plus 5.1, while their best 4-man, Fareed and Jokic in that front court. And I don't really think Fareed's a great player, but him paired with Jokic is actually where his strengths can be used, and I've got no problem with that pairing. So the best 4-man was Fareed and Jokic, the Rooster and Jameer at a plus 22.5, which is just massive. Most used 3-man, Gaz, Rooster, Jokic plus 6.1. The best 3-man, Jokic with Nelson and Fart and Will Barton at a plus 16.3. And their best 2-man lineup was, unsurprisingly, their best 2 players, and that is Gallinari and Jokic at plus 8.3. Let's talk about some stash players that this team's got that they can bring over. A couple of guys that are of real interest, or can be of real interest to us in dynasty leagues, only deeper dynasty leagues, but it's still important to talk about them. Nikola Jokic is a Serbian point guard that plays for Real Betis. He was the 27th pick in the second round of the 2015 draft. He barely played, not this past season, the season before, only 2 games due to a serious injury. So he came back from that injury this season, played 25 minutes a game, averaged 9 points, 2.5 boards, 2.7 assists, a steal, and had some pretty poor shooting, 37, 26, and 75 as his shooting splits. I think that he can be okay, and he can, for a team that's going to lose Jameer Nelson at some point, he could come over, be a third point guard, and maybe find himself in a backup point guard role in 2 to 3 years' time. But he's definitely doesn't have the star potential, but he is a player. I have him in one of the 30-team Red Rock leagues as a stash option. So that's a league that goes 360 players deep. That's probably where you want to look at him if you've got that stash ability. The other guy that I like probably a little bit more is Peter Corneli, who is a 6'11 center from France. He was the 23rd pick in the second round of last year's draft. He played last season for Le Mans over in France. Just 16 games and only started 6 of those at 16 minutes a game. 6 points, 5 boards. Half a steal, half a block in 16 minutes, but he also hit 0.7 threes in that time, with a split or a slash line of 46-31, and hit every single one of his free throws for the year. He had a PER of 17.5, a true shooting of 53, and a net rating of 10.5 with a usage of 20. I think that Corneli can be a really interesting player. He's obviously going to get the Rudy Gobert comparisons because he's tall and skinny and French, but that's not what he is. He is a shot blocker, but he is a guy that can stretch out and hit some threes, and I think that he can become a legitimate contributor. Obviously, for Denver, that's going to be behind Jokic, and there's also Mason Plumlee there, but he could be part of a deal at some point, and I could see him playing a couple of seasons in the NBA at a 17 to 20 minute level, blocking 1.3 shots and hitting maybe a 3 a game, maybe with 5 boards and 8 points. It's not great, but I do think I have a level of hope for Corneli that he can become a rotation player in the NBA. And for those guys in deeper leagues, finding someone who can actually be a 3-point shooter, free throw shooter, and shot blocker, which is what Corneli can be, I think he is someone that you definitely want to have a look at. And out of these 2 guys, Corneli over Radicevic to me is the better option here. And he is another guy that I've got stashed in a couple of dynasty leagues, just waiting for him to come over and be able to be an impactful guy. I'm just not holding my breath that it's going to be in Denver, but it could be. Well, they could trade someone like Mason Plumlee and move him into the backup role, but he is a guy whose stat line is going to be pretty interesting from a fantasy point of view. I thought he looked pretty good over in Summer League last year, and he is that player that you just got to keep him in the back of your mind, because he is one of those stash guys that I think can have some use, whereas some of them don't necessarily get to that level. But that's where we are with Peter Corneli. Let's now have a look at these players on this Nuggets team in a bit more detail. And of course, we start with the man, Nikola Jokic, who was the 19th ranked player over the course of the season. He played only 28 minutes a game, averaged 16.5 points, 0.6 threes, 10 boards, 5 assists, 0.8 steals, 0.7 blocks, and 58% from the field, 83% from the line and 32% from three for a true shooting of 63%. His value comes really from his ability to hit his shots. Like, that field goal percentage is just super valuable. That's a plus 2.27 in Z score for that field goal percentage, which is massive. His huge rebounding numbers, and of course his ability to get assists as a center is off the charts. Not a big scorer, not hitting threes, and the defensive numbers aren't great, but there is potential there for him to become a 1-1 guy. He was at 0.6, 0.8, 0.7 this year in 28 minutes, so I don't think it's unrealistic to think that he could be a player that averages 18 and 10 with a 1-1 and 5 to 5.5 assists. After the All-Star break, he played a little bit more, 30 minutes in on average over that time frame, averaged almost 18 points, 12 boards, 6 assists, got that steal a game, 0.7 blocks and 0.6 threes, and still maintained the efficiency going at 58% from the field and 84% from the line. In my head-to-head ranks, he was the 24th ranked player for the year. He was 27th pre-All-Star and 20th post-All-Star. He gets a little bit of a knockdown in the head-to-head ranks, but he is still a comfortable second-round pick. I do have some concerns with him being a first-round pick next year. Look, if he got 34 minutes a game, it's pretty much a no-brainer, and you know that I love Jokic, but I just have the fear that he won't get 34 minutes a game, that he might be getting 31 minutes a game and have some foul trouble, because he commits really dumb fouls. And while you might think this is just going to be a Nikola Jokic daisy chain here, it's not going to be the case, because he does make some dumb mistakes. His defense is a problem. He has these frustration fouls when teams are bringing the ball in after a made basket, and he just tries to slap at the point guard's arms. He gets fouls quickly. He gets pissed relatively quickly with that sort of stuff. He's not a bad teammate. He's not a distractor or anything like that, but he just makes those dumb fouls, and that's got to be eliminated. And once that is, then we're talking about a guy that can stay 34 minutes on the court and be able to push to that top 12, top 10 sort of a number. To me, he's more of a guy that I look at in that range of 9 to 15, John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins, Chris Paul, LeBron James, all those guys in that sort of a range, rather than in that top 8 of Kawhi, Towns, Davis, Leonard, I think I said Kawhi already, Gianni, Steph, KD, Harden, Westbrook. He's not in that group just yet. But if you believe he's playing 34 minutes a night, then he's that guy. He's per 36 numbers for the season, 21.5 and 12.5 with 6.5 assists and a steal, 0.9 blocks. Like, those numbers made him the 8th best player in per 36 value for the season, and obviously that's super impressive. He had a stack of triple doubles down the end of the season. I think he had 6 of them post All-Star break, so some pretty good numbers for him there. Obviously, huge assist numbers through the ridiculous efficiency. He's look, this is the way he ended the season. His last game of the year, he played 40 minutes, 29 and 16 with 8 assists, 1 steal, and 5 blocks. That's ludicrous. That is just such a stupid line. Oh, and he shot 64% from the field. That is such a stupid line that you go, how can I not pick him in the first round? But there is a level of risk. It's very minimal, because if you pick him at 10, what's the worst he's going to be? 17th, 16th, 15th? He's not going to fall, but there is also that chance that he doesn't be the 10th guy and he instead is the 16th or 17th guy. So I wouldn't have an issue with taking him at the end of the first or at the turn. I'm just not 100% locked in that he's going to jump into that upper tier of those top 8 guys and challenge them. He could, but he just needs to play a consistent 35 minutes a game, I think, to get there. And that's where a level of my concern does appear with him, not just with those stupid fouls that he does commit at times. But I'm as big a Nikola Jokic fan as there is, and I have been for quite a while. He is the best passing center in the NBA, maybe ever, probably ever, almost definitely ever. It is as fun as anything you could watching him pass. Adam Mares, host of Locked On Nuggets, had a great post the other day of all of Nikola Jokic's assists. If you haven't watched it, please do. It is just stupendous. He is nominated for Assist of the Year for the NBA awards, and I don't even think it was his best assist. Some of the stuff that he does is ludicrous. He's a great teammate, and he's going to be an awesome fantasy guy, and he could very well be a top 10 player next year. I'm not 100% sold on it, and I do think that he has the potential to get a little bit overdrafted next year, especially if someone starts reaching into the top 8 or top 9 for him. I reckon there is that bit of a risk, but if he's there at 12, no problem, because that level of field goal efficiency, along with passing, it's a combination that doesn't exist. It just does not exist anywhere. High rebounds and then high free throw percentage. It is truly a unique combination. He also, unsurprisingly, led the team in on-off at 11.9, if you don't include Malik Beasley, who had 17.9, but he played minimal minutes, but Jokic was by far the most influential player on this team. The Rooster, Danilo Gallinari, had another strong season. He finished the year as the 53rd ranked player. Played 63 games, so had some injuries, as is usual with him. Had that groin problem, which kept him out of a few games. 34 minutes a game, 18 points, 2 triples, 5 boards, 2 assists. But his value comes from the fact that he shot 90% from the line, and he did it on 6 attempts. That is a huge, huge number. I talked about the Jokic's field goal percentage impact as being a plus 2.2. Gallo's free throws are almost there. He's a plus 1.8 in that category. And for the last couple of years, his ability to get to the line has been ridiculous. 6.1 attempts this year, 8.2 attempts last year. The year before, 3.2. A real big change in his mentality. And it started with a Eurobasket, where we saw him in between that 2015 and 2016 season, where he went over there and started attacking the rim like crazy, and then it translated to last year, and it kept going with this year at a stupendously high rate. He also took his field goal percentage up from 41 to 45, and his three-pointers up from 36 to 39, and had a true shooting of 62% on usage of 20 for a perimeter three-point based shooter. That is absolutely bananas. It's ludicrous. It's so good. Now the thing is what happens with the Rooster moving forward. He does struggle defensively. We know that he does have his issues with what he can do on defense. So, what do you pay him for a guy that does have those injury-prone concerns? I think that if the Nuggets can get him for a 3-year deal, and he wants to do a 3-year deal, that they would do it, or maybe a 3+1, they would do it. But there is obviously some level of concern. The other thing you got to think of is, can Denver attract another free agent? Can they get someone like Paulie Millsap to come across? Because do you go in that direction versus the Rooster just to provide some defensive flexibility? Even though Millsap's 3 years older, providing some defense in the front court might be helpful. But the Jokic-Gallinari combination works well. What he does is really underrated. Gallinari, I think he's a super player, especially for fantasy, and he was a monster down the stretch. The 35th ranked player after the All-Star break, averaging 25.5 and 93% from the line on 6 attempts and 2.5 threes. Absolutely killed it down that stretch. If I had to guess, I think that he will be back in Denver, and I think that they will want to bring him back. But I'm very much unsure about how the Nuggets are going to approach him moving forward. Regardless of where he goes, I think that he'll be fine, because that free throw rate, I reckon, can maintain his ability to score and his ability to hit threes. It's not based on usage of 30%. It was right on average 20%, and that means that he's got that ability to fit in it with other teams as well. He's not relying on big defensive numbers or assists or anything like that, or having the ball in his hands for massive chunks of time. It's about getting to the line, being efficient, scoring, and hitting threes. And I think that can translate no matter where he goes, assuming he doesn't go to some team where he plays 25 minutes, which I cannot see that happening anywhere. But I think he's going to be relatively safe for at least the next 2 years. He had an on-off of plus 5.6 as well, which was obviously impressive. Let's talk about Gary Harris. Gaz was fantastic this season. He only played 57 games. He had persistent injuries throughout the year with his ankle. That cost him a lot of time. As I said, he only played the 57 games. He had a groin problem as well, which limited him earlier on in the season. In his 57 games, he was the 65th ranked player, played 31 minutes a night, averaged 15 points, 2 threes, 3 boards, 3 assists, 1.2 steals, and shot a ridiculous 50% from the field, 78% from the line, and 42% from 3 for a true shooting of 61%. Their top 3 guys, Jokic, Gallo, and Harris, all had true shooting over 60, which is a remarkable number. Now, Gaza was even better after the All-Star break. He was the 37th ranked player in that time frame, averaging 35 minutes a game, 17 points, 2.2 threes, 3.2 rebounds, and 3.2 assists, and got him up to 1.4 steals, and shot a crazy 53% from the field on 12 attempts per game. The Nuggets' shot distribution after the All-Star break was pretty spread. 12.5 to Jokic, 12.5 to Gallo, 12 to Gaz, and 12.9 to Wilson Chandler. So it wasn't like he was getting this massive usage rate there. He was getting the same sort of shot attempts that all these other guys were, and he was just doing it efficiently, and that was the manner of this team on offense through the season, and so much of that is brought about by what Jokic can do, opens up stuff for these other players. He's also an excellent free throw shooter, 83% from the line, and he heads into his 4th season next year, so massive room for Gaz to grow. The thing I liked about him post All-Star is he got those steal numbers up. He is a fantastic defender, and sometimes it takes 3-4 years for fantastic defenders to actually get their steal numbers up. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope took a little bit. Michael Kidd-Gilchrist especially, he was able to get his steal rate, which was horribly low, up to a decent level this year. And Gaz Harris should be considered one of those guys. And it's not like he had bad steal rates before, but he can still push it up to 1.5 to 1.6, and that efficiency, it's not really a fluke. 50% this year, he shot 47% last year. Just a super efficient player, and if I had to guess, I would say that he is a top 50 player next year. Now, whether you would draft him in that spot, I'm not sure. Depends on so many other factors, but I think for a guy that can go 15 points with 2 threes, 3 assists, 1.5 steals, and ridiculous efficiency in both categories. Well, actually, maybe he's not as ridiculous in his free throws because he did dip a little bit there, but he can be an 83 to 84 guy, I believe, there. That's top 50 numbers for Gaz, and he'll continue to get better. And for anyone who's worried about Jamal Murray taking his minutes, Farton Will Barton, Malik Beasley, don't. Gaz is strong. There was lots of talk last season, I think Gary Harris is going to be reduced to the 6-man role. Murray's going to take his job. Let me assure you that Denver loves Gaz. They love what he provides, and to me, I don't think there's any unless something weird happens and Beasley takes a step up and Manny Mudiay comes out of nowhere and really takes charge of the point guard role and they play him with Murray. Gaz Harris is the starting shooting guard on this team, and while you might not consider him a star, I think he's a perfect complement for Jokic as well to provide some defense and be such an efficient player around the wing. He is a supremely underrated player, and he's only going to get better in my opinion. That PR of 16.5 for a 22-year-old guard, that's really good. And I'm super excited to see where Gaz goes. And he is the guy that I think that, from the end of year rankings, where again he was 65th, he can take a 10-20 spot leap next year and maybe become the 45th ranked guy. Maybe even put himself into the top 35 discussion, as he did after that All-Star break where he was 35th on those, when he got himself healthy, played the minutes and had the efficiency really rolling. He is a star in the making. Maybe not an all-star, but he is a star for this team, and he can be just a super solid fantasy guy, especially in the roto leagues with that ability to have those percentages be so efficient and then add steals, threes, points, and a surprising amount of assists. He is going to be a really useful fantasy player for years to come. Wilson Chandler, old baby neck. Weird season from Wills. Didn't play at all in the 2015-16 season due to a hip injury. Came back, was a big part of what this team did. Was third in the team in minutes per game, 31 minutes. Started some, came off the bench for others. He was sort of all over the place. Ended up starting 33 of his 71 games, and was led the team in minutes, total minutes in minutes per game. He was at 31, so that was third. But total minutes, he led the team. 15.7 points, 1.5 threes, 6.5 boards, 2 assists, 0.7 steals, 0.5 blocks at 46 and 73. Now, he was the 95th ranked player for the season, but he's not quite as good as a head-to-head guy where he was 126th for the year, just because, again, he's a very solid contributor right across the board, and that can still have its uses in head-to-head leagues, no doubt, but he's just not quite as impactful as what he might be in a rotisserie league where his value does jump up. Now, for him moving forward, I do fear that maybe Wilson's got 1 year left at this level before guys like Juancho Hernan-Gomez start to take over for the Nuggets, who plays at the 3 and the 4, and I'll get to Juancho later on. I'm a huge Juancho fan. So Wilson's a guy who has I guess, depreciating dynasty value. But for next season, I would expect a marginal dip, and I think that he probably finishes outside the top 100 next year. Maybe he sees a minute less per game, but a lot of that has to do with if Gallinari resigns or what else they do in free agency. Because if Gallo isn't there and they don't fill his spot, then you're going to have 34 minutes a night, I reckon, from Wilson, because there's no one set to just really jump up and take that role. Although, one show's obviously a contender, I'm not sure that would happen necessarily next season. I reckon you get one more year out of Wilson Chandler at this level, and it could go up or it could slightly decrease depending on what the Rooster does. But he's 29 years of age, so there is going to be some level of decline coming from Chandler at some point in the coming seasons. He was pretty solid offensively. He was decent defensively, nothing great, but he was decent there defensively, and had a nice average PER of 14.9, and the true shooting not quite as impressive as those other three guys before him, but still he still was relatively efficient for a wing player. Mason Plumlee came across at that trade deadline in exchange for Yusuf Nurkic in that first round pick. He ended up playing 81 games for the year, Plumlee, but let's have a look at what he did in Denver, because his production understandably dropped considerably. 26 games for the Nuggets, 23 minutes a game, 9 and 6.5 with 2.5 assists, 1.1 blocks, and shot 54 and 63 from the field and from the line, and that put him as the 118th ranked player in that post-All-Star period. So he wasn't useless. There were some games that he started with Jokic. I didn't think that was necessarily the best use of resources on this team. But I think seeing him as a 20-minute player a game next year is probably the most realistic expectation, maybe a little bit less, because I don't think that he should be playing minutes next to Jokic, or many minutes next to Jokic, although Mike Malone disagrees, despite the fact that the evidence states that that's not a great idea, and playing another center next to Jokic has never worked all that well. So I do have concerns, and I don't think that he is going to be a 12-team league guy next year. Plumlee, assuming he is back in Denver, he could be on another team where he starts and puts up some good numbers with solid assists. But to me, he is going to be like a 16-team league sort of a player who plays that 20-minute backup center role. I think you're going to see a relatively significant dip even on his post-All-Star numbers next season, just as he won't start as much with Jokic, and they'd be looking to strengthen up that front court a little bit as well. Plus, the growth of a player like Hernan Gomez can take some of those minutes from the four, which would have gone to Plumlee in the past. So I think he's just going to be a backup center and not really challenge for huge amounts of fantasy value. Farton Will Barton, 60 games for Will, 28 minutes a game, and was the 110th ranked player in fantasy. Now, you would be well aware that I'm not a big Barton fan. The team was 4 points per 100 possessions worse off with him on the court versus on the bench, and he did struggle a little bit in that second half of the year. For the season, he averaged 13.5 points, 1.5 threes, 4.5 boards, 3.5 assists, 0.8 steals, half a block on 44 and 75, and 37 from three. So, smack bang average shooting numbers, true shooting of 55. That's all solid. But to me, he falls into that category of a player who's not really that good, who can put up fantasy stats when he gets the minutes, but he's not good enough to demand them on an ongoing basis. And with the growth of Gaz Harris, the play of the Blue Arrow Jamal Murray, with potentially Malik Beasley getting back into the rotation, maybe Manny Mudiay steps up, I'm not really sure where Barton sits with his team. I don't think he is a part of their future core. I don't think he is that good. He's got a really cheap and tradable contract, and I wouldn't be surprised if Will Barton doesn't start next season on the Denver Nuggets. He is not a player that I would have massive faith in becoming good anywhere else. I just don't think he's a good player. I think he has moments, and I think he can provide some pretty decent defense, as he did show during the season, but he's a streaky shooter. While those numbers are average, he's likely to go 48% for 1-2 games and then shoot 12% for 2 games. He's up and down with his consistency. His effort levels, I don't think, can really ever be questioned, and he is... Look, I say that I don't think he's that good. To me, he has surpassed what I thought he could become. He's better than what I thought he could be. But I still don't think that he gets held in high reverence by lots of people, in lots of fantasy people. As well. I've got to give Will Barton his minutes. Will Barton's going to blow up. And I just think he's just not that good. He's not on the level of these other guys like Murray and Harris. He's just nowhere near those guys, and he fits in as a as a backup swingman who plays 22, 24 minutes a night on a team that starts to really push into consideration. Like, you consider that Blue Arrow played just 22 minutes. Like, he's going to get more minutes than that next season, and a lot of that is going to come at the expense of Will Barton, I think. So you'll see some of his minutes dip down, and his, fall from fantasy relevancy is going to begin, and he's going to find himself, much like Mason Plumlee, as being a 16-team league sort of a player, probably as early as next season. Let's move on to Ken Farid, another player who I don't think is very good. 61 games for Farid, 21 minutes, 9.5 points and 7.5 rebounds. Really did some nice stuff defensively this season. 0.7 steals and 0.7 blocks, shooting 55 and 69 from the field and from the line. I was impressed with his his improved ability to block shots at times. It did fade off a little bit down the stretch, but he had put together some decent numbers, especially early on. And him pairing with Jokic, I think, is a good pairing for this team. The problem is he's just so limited in what he can do. He scores as a pick and roll guy. He is an offensive rebounder, and despite the improvement in his defensive stats, I don't think he is necessarily a very good defender. He's not a horrible one. He's probably a better defender than what Jokic is, but he was used in curious ways. When the team had both Jokic and Nurkic on the team, the fact that Mike Malone continued to go with Kenneth Faried at center for big stretches of time was absolutely baffling to me. And even with Jokic and Plumlee on the team, you still got minutes from Faried at center, which, while minutes for him at center might be the best for him in terms of fit in the modern NBA, he's not as good a center as those other three guys that I mentioned. That he did take some of those minutes away, and he had some success there. But overall, the minutes with him at center, they were far from ideal. In fact, he played 26% of his minutes at center this season, up from 20 the year before, according to Basketball Reference. And the fact that he saw his minutes at center increase when the team had more Nurkic and more Jokic and the addition of Plumlee is a failing on Mike Malone's part, in my opinion. Post All-Star, Faried only played 18 minutes a game. He was in and out of the lineup. His back gave him problems all season. I think this is who he is. I think he is an 18 to 20 minute a game player who can provide a solid boost for rebounds and field goal percentage as a stream option for standard leagues, but he is not a starter moving forward. The team was 3 points better off with him on the bench. He had a ranking of 212th post All-Star break. I just don't think that he's again a guy in 35 minutes he will put up top 100 numbers. There is no doubt about that. He is just not good enough to even approach 30 minutes anymore. And with the way the NBA is going, he just is never going to be that guy. So he's going to be relegated to the deeper leagues and to those dynasty formats. But he is definitely, in my opinion, on the way down. I am not a big Kenneth Faried fan. Jameer Nelson, 75 games for Jameer, 27 minutes a game, 9 points, 1.5 threes. He had 5 assists and 0.7 steals and shot 44% from the field, which almost is the biggest surprise of anything for the season on the Nuggets, is the fact that Jameer Nelson was able to be an efficient shooter, considering how inefficient he has been at times in his career. The fact that he was able to be that option who could hit shots was key. In fact, he was third on this team in minutes at the age of 34, which is an absolutely astonishing number. Defensively, he struggled. Offensively, he was okay. His advanced numbers, nothing there looks spectacular. And I wouldn't be expecting to see Jameer Nelson start big chunks of games again next year. He started 39 games this season, but I would think that it's either going to be Moutier stepping back up, or they're going to run full-time with Jamal Murray as the starting point guard. He was close to being a fantasy, or he was a guy you could own in fantasy in many instances during the season, especially for that 5+ assist rate. He was 125th post All-Star. He put together some pretty good numbers, and that post All-Star is when he did start over Moutier. 30 minutes a game, 9, 3, and 5.5 with a steal and 1.5 threes at 45%. Like these are really solid numbers, and I said that was a big surprise. His last 3 years, he'd shot 39, 41, and 37% from the field, so he took a real step forward. And as I said with many of these players, a lot of it is the Jokic effect. Gaz Harris's efficiency, the Roosters' efficiency, Jameer Nelson's efficiency. A lot of it is to do with Jokic putting these guys in just ludicrous positions to score. and then being able to convert them when they've found themselves in space or cutting to the rim. And that's something I didn't talk about with Gaz Harris. His communication levels with Jokic are through the roof, and his ability to know where to cut and for Jokic to find him is going to make that a pretty decent partnership for years to come. As for Nelson, I don't think that he's a guy, and as I talk about on all these podcasts, yeah, he might be the 130th ranked player, and you go, well, that means that he's worth the 12th pick. It doesn't, because his upside is just not there to get better from there. I'd rather leave him go, and then if I need it later on for a 2-week period, just grab him and let's add him off the wire, because the arrow is trending down here for Nelson, and those assists can be super valuable, but where does the playing time go with him as this team moves forward? Which is a perfect segue for me to talk about the Blue Arrow. Jamal Murray played all 82 games as a rookie with a sports hernia injury, which he had surgery on in the offseason. Hopefully that's all recovered and ready to go for training camp. 82 games, 22 minutes, 10 points, 1.5 threes, which is basically the same as what Nelson did in 6 less minutes, 2.6 rebounds, 2 assists, 0.7 steals, and 41, 88, and 34 is his percentages for a true shooting of 52. That might not seem spectacular, but for a rookie point guard who didn't play point guard in college and is 19 years of age, that's pretty impressive in my opinion. I was really impressed with what the Blue Arrow did. 12 PER, true shooting of 52, as I said. Defensively, he has his concerns, and that contributes a lot to the concerns that this team has defensively, especially when Jokic is leading the team, that you need something a little bit more from your point guards. But I didn't think he was horrendous in that spot. He wasn't as bad as what he was perhaps advertised to be coming out of college. And I'm super excited for what Jamal can do as we move forward. After the All-Star break, he saw his minutes go to 25, averaged 12, 2.5, and 3, with 1.7 threes, a steal on 42 and 90, and shot 34% from 3. Super efficient. To me, he should be their starting point guard next year, and I think that he will be worth a top 100 pick, or at least a top 110 pick. He was post All-Star break. He found himself as the 141st ranked player, so I can definitely see him, and that's in only 25 minutes a game. I can see him playing 30 minutes a game next year, averaging 15 with 2.5 threes, 4.5 assists, 1.2 steals, and getting that efficiency up, as many players do, unless your name's Trey Lyles, as many players do in their second season. You're improving their field goal percentage by 2 to 3%, their 3-point percentage by 2 to 3%, sometimes even 6 to 8%. If he gets 6 or 8% on his three-pointers, he's going to be shooting 41, which is ludicrous. But I think he's got a real chance to take that true shooting up 4 or 5% in total and be a really super valuable player for this team. And I can't believe still that they got him at pick 7. So he is a guy. Now, I don't know if he'll be able to do it in dynasty leagues. I really think that he has got top 50 upside moving forward. Probably within 2 years, he's got that ability. He does need to get those assist numbers up, so we'll see how that goes. And playing alongside Harris and Jokic does really limit his assist upside. He's never going to be a 10 assist game guy. He'll probably never be an 8 or a 7, but I think he can be maybe like a Damian Lillard, who is a 5.5 to 6 guy, which always precludes you from being a top 20 guy at that lower volume like Murray is. But I think he can be a top 50 or at worst a top 75 guy in the next couple of seasons. I'm really stoked to see where the Blue Arrow goes and where he can take things. The team was also 3.7 points per 100 possessions better off with him on the court. Jameer Nelson was also a plus 5.2, and in large part, if you add those two up, it equals 8.9, and coincidentally, Emmanuel Mudiay was a negative 8.9 in on-off numbers, and it doesn't always work as cleanly as that, but that's a big part of why those guys have some boosted on-off numbers, is because Mudiay sucked for the majority of the season. Let's now move on to Manny Mudiay, who played just 55 games and 26 minutes per game. He's found himself not only benched, but completely out of the rotation at the end of the season. He started 41 games out of his 55 and averaged 11 points with a 3, 4 assists, 3.5 boards, 0.8 steals, and shot 38% from the field and 32% from 3. There were some improvements in his game, though. He took his free throw percentage up 11.5%, up to 78, and that's making him not a liability in that category, which was a real concern with him. His field goal percentage went from 36 to 38. Not big steps, but big enough. His 3-point percentage still at 32, which it was last season as well, and his true shooting went from 44 to 48.5. And so there are steps forward there. He saw his assist rate drop, though, which is disappointing, and his scoring stayed about the same. Where does he fit in? I think I'm not out on Emmanuel Mudiay at all. I think that the fact that he was able to take steps forward in his shooting and post All-Star break, even though he only played 11 games, he shot 44% from the field, 84% from the line, and 39% from three. We saw him have that ridiculous game against Boston earlier in the season, where I think he hit like 20 points in the first quarter. His true shooting after the break was at 56%. You're really efficient there, and had 3 assists per game in 15 minutes in that time frame. They are real signs of growth. I thought he looked much, much better in that post-All-Star section. Now, whether he is the starting point guard or Jamal Murray, I think it's Murray. But I wouldn't be surprised if Mudiay really takes a big step forward. And I think that you can get him at a super, super low price in Dynasty Leagues, and I would be doing it. I am thinking that he can become, whether it's on this team or it's on another team, I think that he can become a starting point guard. I am not out on him whatsoever. The Nuggets were at the end of the year. They weren't happy, but they did bring him back in a couple of times, and he played some decent games. And towards the end, when Nelson was injured, this is his stretch of 5 games here down the end of the year. 17-4-9, 15-0-7 in 29 minutes. 6-6-3 in 16 minutes, 9-2-4 in 18 minutes, and 14-5-3 in 24 minutes. And in the last 2 of those games, he shot over 50% from the field, and he was only under 40% in 2 of them, which is an improvement. So there are signs that Mudiay can be decent. I still think that Murray is probably going to be the better option there. And if you're in a dynasty that has 12 teams in it, then Mudiay is probably not going to be an option. But you go to 20 teams, anything obviously deeper than that, maybe even 16 teams, I think that he can find himself probably, maybe not next season because Jameer Nelson will still be around, but I would hope that they would start to go, you know what, 35-year-old Jameer Nelson probably doesn't need 27 minutes a night. Let's hope that Mudiay takes this step forward and it then becomes Murray and Mudiay, or they look to package Mudiay in a trade and he goes somewhere else and can get that option. I think in the next 2 years, he can find himself comfortably as a top 200 player and probably a top 150 guy. And if he starts for another team or even this team, then he's got top 80 potential. So I am definitely not out on Mudiay despite some of the struggles he had. Look, he was one of the worst rookies in recent memories in terms of advanced stats last season. Really bad. Horrible true shooting. And again, that translated again this season. But his advanced numbers still weren't good, but there was levels of improvement. And that's what I'm looking at with Mudiay. And it's talking about getting a guy in a deep format for a cheap price and expecting a leap, expecting him to go from the 3rd string guy to the 2nd string guy. For him to play in a backcourt trio of Mudiay, Murray, and Harris. And I guess you can throw Beasley in there as a 4-man backcourt that moves forward, that gets him 20 minutes a night. I don't think that's an unrealistic expectation to play alongside Murray at times as well. But I think you're going to have some patience. He's 20 years of age. He's still got a lot of growth in him, a lot of ability to improve. So writing him off at this stage, I think is pretty foolhardy. I'm out on Chris Dunn as a player. He's also 3 years older than Emmanuel Mudiay. And I still don't think that Dunn is finished. And Dunn could easily be a starting point guard. Not a very good one, but he could be one. And I think that Mudiay falls into very much a similar zone, except he's a bit bigger, a bit longer, and has 3 more years of development up his sleeve as opposed to a guy like Chris Dunn. So I am pretty buoyant with him. Although, as much as saying that, Jamal Murray to me is the better player and is the starting point guard for this team moving forward. But that doesn't mean that Mudiay can't do it for another team. And if I'm a team like Sacramento and I had competent management, I would see if I can get him for something of very little value and seeing how he can go. I would not be against that. Philadelphia, maybe. The Knicks, I would see if you can. Now, I think Denver still has a decent level of trust in him or a decent level of hope in him. So I don't think it's going to be easy, but in your dynasty leagues, I would be looking to just view it as a lottery ticket with a fairly high degree of coming off. So you don't write him off. Darrell Arthur had a really good year this year, 41 games, but knee problems are going to be what brings him undone. He's dealing with these arthritic problems in his knees, and that limits him. 16 minutes, 6.5 points, 1.3 triples, and he shot the three at 45% this year. Still half a steal and half a block. And if he gets big minutes, he is a fantasy valuable player. He just cannot do it anymore. His knees are done. He's consistently got issues with that area of his body. And it's never going to get better. That's just where we are with Darrell Arthur at this point. He's a guy that can play spot minutes for half the years of the game, or half the year's games, and hit some threes and do some defensive stuff. And he can be a good defensive forward for this team, but he's just not going to be that player that has any sort of long-term value because of the knee issues. And again, Juancho's the guy that's going to be pushing forward into that position. Let's actually talk Juancho now, who played 62 games this year, 14 minutes a game. And you can look at the stats and you won't be blown away, that's for sure. 5 points, 0.7 threes, 3 boards, half an assist, half a steal, 0.2 blocks, 45 and 75. But a true shooting of 60%, awesome. A 3-point percentage of 41%, also awesome. A 13.3 PER, solid box score plus minus, above average win shares. 21 years of age. This guy is going to be good. This team can have the Blue Arrow, Gaz Harris, Juancho Hernangomez, and Nikola Jokic, and the ages of these players: 21 to Jokic, 22 to Gaz, 19 to Murray, and 21 to Hernangomez. That is the core of this team. You can talk about Gallinari, and he was fantastic. He's 28 years of age. Yeah, Moutier is still there at 20 as well. But those four guys, Hernangomez, Jokic, Harris, Murray, they are the core, and the oldest player is Harris at 22, and he's heading into his 4th year. Do not sleep on what Juancho can do. He is going to be a starter, whether it's at the 3 or at the 4, within the next 3 years. And I don't know whether they like him more at the 3 or the 4. He played both positions, but when Gallinari went out and, say, Chandler was hurt, he would play at the 3. And he's not embarrassed defensively. He can defend the threes. He defended Kevin Durant and did as well as what you could expect in that situation. Didn't get embarrassed. He can guard the 3. He can move. He can pass. He can shoot. He can defend. And while it didn't really show this year, he's not a terrible shot blocker. He's a very good rebounder. And to me, it's clear to me, not so much to others, that he is the better Hernangomez brother. That he, maybe not at the moment, but he will be the better Hernangomez brother. He has got much higher upside. He is the one that I think that you want in dynasties out of those two guys. It might not be next season. They might not go, all right, the Rooster's gone, let's put Juancho in there. But I wouldn't have, depending on how he progresses, but I would have no concern saying, you know what, let's start him at the 4. Let's just put him there at the 4. We'll bring the Rooster back. Let's go with Murray, Harris, Gallinari, Juancho, Jokic. Run Wilson Chandler, Mason Plumlee, Manny Moutier off the bench, Farton Will Barton there as well. That's a pretty bloody strong lineup. Now, they probably won't move to Juancho there, but I would say 17 or the 18-19 season, he will start for this team, and he will be a consistent top 100 fantasy threat. People in your league may not view Juancho Hernangomez the same way as well. Maybe I'm skewed because I think he's got a great name, but he is going to be a very, very good player, and I think that people should be really looking at him as a guy that can have tremendous fantasy value. The numbers this year they're not great. Like, his fantasy rankings aren't fantastic. Like, he's outside the top 300, but that doesn't say everything about him. The other guy that we barely saw, Malik Beasley, another first rounder, 22 games, 7.5 minutes, 4 points, half a 3, and everything else under 1. 0.8 rebounds, half an assist. He shot 45% from the field. He shot 80 from the line for a true shooting of 54. Only 32% from 3, but did enough to make me say, good pick. I don't know where he necessarily fits in with this team. There's still a long way to go. But that's we're talking 30-team dynasties that you can have a look at Malik. He is the guy that, we talk about Will Barton on the way down. That's because Malik Beasley will move into that role. Barton and Nelson are the two guys who are going to cop it, while Moutier, Murray, and Beasley, along with Gaz, step forward and become this good combination for them in that backcourt. I'm not sure how good his actual overall fantasy upside is, Malik. He's not going to be a high steals guy or high assists guy. He's not a strong rebounder. He'll hit some threes. He can score a bit. So that limits what he can do from a fantasy point of view. But I think we're going to see a lot more from him this year than what we did last season. He looked a lot better after the All-Star break. In fact, he only played 4 games, but he played 20 minutes a game and averaged 9 points with 2.5 rebounds, 0.8 steals, and 0.8 threes, which is a super, super effort. It's only 4 games. But he took himself to be the 228th ranked player over that time as well in those 4 games. So there is a level of hope for Beasley, a pretty significant level of hope, and by no means was that a bad pick. And I think they've probably come away with it with a rotation level player, which in 20-team leagues, especially 30-team leagues, that is super useful. And he will be that guy that I think should be able to have multiple top 200 seasons, and wouldn't be shocked if he has 3 or 4 top 150 seasons. I don't ever think he'll be a top 50 guy. He might be able to find a couple of top 100 seasons, but I am interested in him moving forward, and I do think there is value. The problem is that Moutier, Harris, and Murray are all ahead of him at this point, or maybe Moutier's not. Let's see how he develops. I still Moutier's got way more potential than him, but there is a lot of hope there for Malik to move forward, and I'm pretty excited and he's 20 years of age as well, but he is more of a long-term investment. Just think that what Will Barton's doing, that Beasley has that potential, I think, and can be that guy. So that's the sort of level you should be looking at. The other player left on this team is Mike Miller, who played 7.5 minutes in 20 games. But as I said, his role was being a guy who busted their ass in practice, made the guys warm up properly, do the right things, and be the perfect example of how a veteran on a team can be useful. Play your 140 minutes for the year, play in emergency situations and blowouts only. Hit 40% of your threes in your 8 minutes and have absolutely zero fantasy impact whatsoever, which is exactly where he was. One thing I didn't talk about with Beasley, the team was 17.9 points per 100 possessions better off with him on the court, which is just a ludicrously large number. Let's now crack into questions, and I think there are a few that you guys have asked me today. David Lelaberte, a serial question asker. I believe the Blue Arrow and Gaz Harris are the most intriguing backcourt in the league. Yes, they are ridiculously intriguing, but they need that big wing 3 and D type who is a good target. Anunoby is going to be an interesting guy that can be that play. He needs to be able to hit the 3, but defensively he is a guy that they should be looking at and draft at that position, who can play at the 4, maybe at the 3 as well. Finding 3 and D wing guys is really tough. Otto Porter would be absolutely sensational, but you're just not getting him. It is hard to find those sort of players. And David actually says, next question, they're trying to steal Porter with a max offer would be perfect, but do they have the cap space? I don't even think it matters if they have the cap space. I probably should have a look at this. Because Washington's just going to match it. I don't think there's any way that we're going to see the Wizards not match a deal for Otto Porter at this point. I'm just going to bring up their payroll to see if there is cap space. I'll go back to answer the other questions before we get back to that. Jordan says, I'm considering keeping Gaz Harris over Andrew Wiggins. Am I crazy? No, you're not. Gaz was a better fantasy player this year. Yes, you get more scoring with Wiggo, but you're going to get more threes, you're going to get more steals, you're going to get more assists, you're going to get much higher efficiency from Harris. So I would have no problem keeping Gaz there. Now, I think they can probably finish in about the same level. And I think if you kept Wiggins, you could get potential higher trade value for him, but I don't think that it's a crazy decision. He outperformed him this season pretty comfortably. So I don't think that is I don't think that's a bad decision at all. Now let's have a look at these cap numbers for the Nuggets. Where are we? That's the 2016 cap. Let's look at next year's cap. We'll go back to that because it's taking a long time to load. Of course, as everything does with the internet here that can't handle streaming and looking up a website at the same time. Good old Australian internet really struggling to get things moving. David also chimes in. We've seen what Jokic does. With what we've seen for Jokic, does Denver make your league pass top 5? Yeah, no doubt. Denver and Philadelphia are in my top 5 league pass teams because of the fun factor. Jokic, Embiid, Simmons, Blue Arrow, they're just fun to watch. Simple as that. Kyle Norb, this is going to be a really good team next year. So disappointed they couldn't sneak into the playoffs. Yes, agree with that. What happens with Moutier? We talked about that. Is it an MCW situation where the lead guard fails due to lack of shooting? I don't think it's quite that level with him. I still think there is some level of potential with Moutier. And as we saw post All-Star, he was able, in that limited playing time, he was able to actually shoot the ball okay. I don't think it's quite a Michael Carter-Williams situation just at this point. He says, do they finally get out from Farid to open up minutes for Hernan Gomez and to play smaller? Chandler at 4. They don't need to get rid of Farid. That they showed at the end of the year that they're happy just to play him 15 minutes a night, 16 minutes a night, and look, maybe they'd like to, but obviously at this point his contract is it's only $12.9 million. It's not a horrendous number. It's not, and each year obviously 1 year comes off the deal, so it looks less and less terrible as we move forward. The Nuggets apparently have, according to Spotrac here, they have cap space of $16.5 million. So that's not enough for a max deal for Otto Porter, which is they wouldn't get him anyway. But that's how I see it happening. So they have got cap space. If they renounce their cap holds, which is on guys like the Rooster and Mason Plumlee, they would have $42 million. So if they renounced Gallinari's bird rights and didn't look to re-sign him, then yes, they could offer for Otto Porter. But again, then you're reducing the ability. You can't sign Gallinari and have that advantage with signing him, and you probably don't get Porter anyway. So while they could create that space pretty comfortably, would it actually be worth it? And in the end, probably not. James Peck, what does a peak Juancho season stat line look like? Can he be productive next season if one of Wilson Chandler or Danilo Gallinari are playing elsewhere and no notable incoming players at the position? How do you see the point guard rotation shaking out? Well, point guard, I say it's Murray and then Nelson/Moutier. I think Murray starts and plays close to 30. Probably 27, 28 at this point, but close to 30. As for Juancho, I think he can be a 15 and 8 guy, or maybe 14 and 8 guy with 1.5 threes, 2 assists, a steal, and 1.2 blocks is probably his peak stat line, which obviously puts him in pretty high company. And can he be productive next season? Yes, if Gallo leaves, I think that he has a real chance. And even if he doesn't, I think that he could find himself getting a 20-minute, 23-minute a night role as either a starting power forward and leaping ahead of Ken Farid. He's got a real chance to do that next season. Whether he does it or not remains to be seen. I'd look at him more for the 18-19 season, but he does have a chance next year to step forward and be able to do that. All right, we are done. We are 45 minutes away from the start of Game 1 of the NBA Finals. I hope you guys are ready to enjoy it. My pick is, I've tweeted out, I'll mention it again now, Warriors in 5 is my selection. Just if anyone wants to know, my son Ben picks Cavs in 7, so he's going on the record with that pick, even though he is a Warriors fan. Not sure why he's going for Cavs in 7, but that's his selection, so we'll see how that breaks down. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at redrock_bball and subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and TuneIn. We are done here, guys. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Juancho Hernan Gomez.